they've been occupying them since 1967. Are they concerned about what might happen if they take their boot off their neck? Okay.
But
you still don't get to do that to people.
Dave Smith debated this Coleman Hughes character, and a lot of people are a little bit on the fence about the outcome here. There are a lot of people saying that this was Dave Smith's weakest debate performance. I don't know if I would characterize it like that. It definitely plays as closer than his other debates. And I think part of it is there's kind of a strategy shift going on, I think, on the propaganda front with regards to Israel. For the longest time, they have trotted out these loud, belligerent, obnoxious, exaggerating characters that exaggerate everything. They don't really understand the history of the situation. They just have their talking points and they just go and deliver them. Now they are trotting out the likes of this Coleman character and your Barry Weisses in order to intellectualize the atrocity of what is going on with the Palestinians, to have somebody that knows, the outlines of history, that are able to drop names and dates and, ostensibly facts, and be able to present themselves as knowledgeable figures that are telling the right side of the story and that are getting it right. And so when Dave Smith is presenting his arguments, and then you have this Coleman character who is just sort of calmly refuting them, and then he'll state like a few dates and names and facts and try to reorient it into some different frame. I think it comes off like he's actually making some kind of a legitimate point, wherein the basis of his argument still falls completely through the floor. And that's what Dave Smith in this segment points out over and over and over again, where you keep coming back to focusing on just the Israeli perspective side of things. You're making this comparison. Well, Israel is the size of New Jersey, and you have these they're surrounded by hostile forces. And what would you do if you were the size of New Jersey? But then they don't take the perspective of, well, what if you were the size of Gaza, which is 100th the size of Israel, even still, and more dense, and they are getting carpet bombed every single day for the last 2 years, or and living under occupation in this open air prison for the last 60 years. And they don't look at that side of things. They want you to just constantly turn your brain off and focus on the Israeli side of things. We have to look at both sides one way or another. But again, like this framing of it that you see from Coleman Hughes over and over again is just very frustrating. I think Dave Smith points that out in this clip, and I'm curious to know what you guys think about this exchange.
We got a real problem with black crime in this country, Coleman. But if I said, let's reinstitute slavery and that will take care of the problem with black crime, I think you'd go, yeah, you don't have a right to do that. And if not having slavery means that it's a little bit more dangerous in some areas, tough, deal with that. You don't, Israel, look, dude, this is just so obvious. It's bananas to me that anybody who lives in a first world country on this side of the Enlightenment can just not say, look, Israel's got two options here. Your options, if you want to be a moral country or whatever, your options are, you can say, we can't give them their own state, and so we're just annexing all of this land and giving citizenship to all the Palestinians, and we will all live under one state together. Or you can stop occupying them militarily and let them have their own, autonomy. Those are the options. You can't just keep your boot on these people's neck forever because you're worried about what might happen, even if it's a legitimate worry about what might happen if you take your boot off. And the idea that on the other side of this, the Palestinians are just supposed to accept you live in subjugation in perpetuity, forever, because some of your leaders made bad decisions. And then, you can say like, look, you could have made this argument about Egypt. I don't think they had a strong enough state to control their radicals or something like that. Now, we could get into a whole separate argument, which is that I think there's a very strong argument that actually Israel is going to face much more of a terrorist threat while they're occupying these areas than they would if they were to give them their own state. And I think there's lots of good reasons to suspect that. But just purely on a principled ground, this is just totally indefensible. And there's no other country that we would call a democracy who behaves this way. It's like, I don't know. I just find this whole thing to be so goofy. Like, either this is Israel, either you're saying Israel has a legitimate claim to Gaza and the West Bank, or you're saying they do not. And if they do not, then they have to stop occupying them. And if they do, then they have to give citizenship to the people that they control. So it's really fundamental Western civilization stuff.
So the analogy to slavery is a bad one for many reasons. But first, yes, Jefferson and Southerners in general, they feared, partly based on Haiti and other examples, that if they gave slaves freedom, it would result in a race war. And this was highly motivating for Southerners. It turned out to be completely wrong. Now, there was a lot of evidence at the time that this wouldn't happen, namely the fact that you had Black people living very peacefully all over the North with no problem. You even had free Blacks in the South with no problem. And so you would have had to cherry pick massively to look at the Nat Turner revolt, say, erase all the other evidence of peaceful coexistence between whites and blacks and say, we can't let these people have freedom because look at Nat Turner. Not only that, there was no, anytime there was Black leadership, the most famous Black leader, the most important Black leader in the aftermath of the Civil War was Booker T. Washington, right? You can make the same argument about like the civil rights movement, right? We can't give them voting rights because then they're going to make decisions that are going to be terrible. It's going to be a race war. They're going to destroy us. They're going to, slaughter us. Every single popular Black leader, Booker T. Washington, utterly peaceful, had the total faith and devotion of the Black community. He was the most beloved figure, and he was fundamentally nonviolent. Martin Luther King, absolutely the most beloved figure within the Black community, much more so than Malcolm X at the time. And even Malcolm X in his most radical mood, never...
He wasn't a terrorist, yeah.
He wasn't a terrorist. So there was an enormous amount of evidence in the case of African Americans in the United States that the likely result of loosening the chains was not going to be a race war. It's just that people ignored that evidence.
But
when you
let's
translate that to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, they leave Gaza. Two different countries impose a harsh blockade in response to rockets against Israel, and one of those two countries gets October 7th and not the other. So one question I have for you is like, why doesn't Hamas attack Egypt? Why can't they spare a single rocket for Egypt if it's all about the blockade and occupation?
No, I mean, obviously, because their hatred of Israel is on a whole different level. And also, I don't know, there's...
So then it's not all about the blockade and the...
It's not. No, it's not all. A lot of it's about the creation of the state of Israel. A lot of it's about the fact that they view that as their land, that a lot of them did get kicked out of. Of course, all of this stuff is involved. But anyway, back to your point, though. But so say there was a higher risk. And again, I wasn't saying, I wasn't saying, a lot of times when people make logical analogies, people say, well, that's a bad analogy because the situations aren't the same. But there's a difference between equating two different things and making a logical analogy. The claim isn't that they're the same. But let's say there was going to be a real increase in crime, or let's say there was that some of the Black leaders were more radical and were, hold on, let me just finish.
Sure.
And were advocating violence. Is the answer then continue the institution of slavery? I mean, the thing is no, right? It's obviously... And look, the thing about this is with all of this stuff, I just feel like to be a defender of Israel requires you to not be fair-minded to both groups here. It requires you to think of but think about the danger that the Israelis might have to deal with if they were to give these people a state. It's think about the danger that the Palestinians are in being militarily occupied. How are you going to sit here and tell these people that you guys have to embrace nonviolence, your leaders all have to be nonviolent leaders, while the Israeli leaders can be as horrifically violent as they want to? You call Hezbollah a terrorist organization, you call Hamas a terrorist organization. I'm fair enough. I don't really object to that categorization. I don't exactly see why the IDF wouldn't also be categorized as a terrorist organization.
So, but here's the crucial difference. The crucial difference is that Israeli society, as we've discussed in this conversation, if they feel they have a partner for peace, are capable of offering, of negotiating in good faith and making an offer because they don't want to serve in the army for the rest of time. They don't want to send their boys to fight these wars. Hamas rejects the two-state solution, period. So,
but we just talked about so does Benjamin Netanyahu.
But Israel is a democracy and they will vote Netanyahu out of power if they feel that the other side is capable and interested
But
in
they've
a
made him their
permanent end to the
longest serving
conflict.
prime minister in their country's history. So like they're not voting him out of
But when
power
did
that much.
Hold on. This happened, as you yourself admitted, not even reluctantly. I don't mean to phrase it that way. The second Intifada, Israel offered a two-state end of conflict period. It was rejected by the Palestinians, and then the second Intifada was launched. This was, mothers sending their kids on 2 different buses to schools because a bus was getting blown up every 3 days, right? Which was traumatizing for a country the size of New Jersey. I can't imagine how I would react having grown up in New Jersey if there was 2 bombs going off a week just in my state alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would demand of my government to absolutely do what it had to do to make us safe. Not only that, the fact that this came right after an offer of peace and what Shlomo Ben-Ami called the biggest effort ever to pressure an international leader on any issue to end this conflict, because the world, my God, we have to see this conflict end at some point. It's so heartbreaking. The problem with this is that Israeli society can move because it's a democracy. Hamas can't move. Hamas is absolutely committed to rejecting the only solution that could bring an end to this conflict. And so Hamas is like a rock, whereas Israel, object as much as you want to Netanyahu. I'm not going to defend him. I'm not going to defend Smotrich. I'm not going to defend Ben-Gvir. Israel is a democracy that can move to the left if the opportunity came, sign a peace treaty that will be inked for all time. How the hell do we get that with Hamas running the Gaza Strip when every single time they are asked, they say, we reject any alternative for all time, except between the river and the sea?
Yeah, there actually have been different periods of time where Hamas leaders have said they would accept 67 borders, but they have also a lot of times said they wouldn't, and so
including over and over again recently, and in their charter.
Yeah, I'm not even like arguing with you on that detail, but it's always like when you say like Hamas. First of all, I actually disagree with fundamentally with your premise that democracies like have this ability to move. I think actually one of the kind of counterintuitive, strange realities is that often democracies get very stuck. And for example, like the political system in the United States of America really has not like fundamentally changed nearly as much as the political system in China has over, say, like the last 40 years. And they did it through a one-party dictatorship. They still call themselves because the one party says business is good now, and then all of a sudden it's a drastically different thing than it was before.
And just to comment on a few things. So like Dave's take on democracy, I find a little bit silly. I don't really believe in like the uniparty concept. I think Democrats are drastically different than Republicans, but where they do agree is on the corporate structure, the corporate rule of things that have been the gold standard of the last 40 to 50 years, as far as I can tell, and has caused the degradation of the middle class and a lot of the problems in terms of radicalization in this country and stagnation. I think that's a problem of corruption, and I believe that is not a problem of democracy in its core. I think pure democracy, if you have equal representation and, one vote per individual, everyone has an equal weighted vote, without nonsense of electoral college and all that bullshit. That's also a whole other conversation. But between the corruption, pay-for-play politics, corporations and billionaires being able to basically rule the country, well, they've constructed a government that works for them and that does exactly what they want. And so that's why you haven't had the change that we would like in the last 40 years and a lot of that frustration. The other thing, again, like responding to Coleman Hughes, his whole thing is you can't let the Palestinians be free because Palestinians are run by Hamas. That is like their brutal, governing force right now. And all Hamas wants is to destroy Israel. So, of course, we can't let them be free. But again, Israel and Netanyahu is the one that has propped up Hamas and kept them in power to have to make it so that they don't have a partner for peace on that side, which has continued to radicalize the Israeli population, to continue supporting and propping up Netanyahu and perpetuating this disastrous situation where you have perpetual occupation and conflict and war and retaliation on both sides. Obviously, much more asymmetrically is from Israel towards the Palestinians than the other way around.
Regardless of that, yeah, but like you can say, there's a lot of things Hamas could do that would be a lot better than the things that Hamas has done and could do now that would be better than the things they're doing. Israel also can end the war. It's not true that only one side could do the things that would end the war. I don't even know if you can call it a war. But
They
Israel
could end this
could.
war, but Hamas is just going to restart the war.
It's not
the
even
first
really a war,
opportunity they
man.
get.
Like a war, you kind of think of as like two governments with militaries battling. It's a
But
captive
Hamas has
people.
what,
It's a
20,000, 30,000 people? That's not a war? Hamas has 30,000 fighters or whatever it is?
Yeah, no, it's a captive people who have been held stateless without a military of their own being like annihilated. I mean, like, yeah, I don't think war is exactly the right word. But regardless of that, Israel also has the opportunity. Israel could simply say, we're going to stop militarily occupying the West Bank. We're going to pull those, and we're going to live in 67 borders. And you do what you want to do, but if you attack us, we're responding. They could do that too, and they have not done that.
Yeah,
but
well,
I do just
hold on.
again,
So,
hold on.
again,
Let me just get a points out here because I'm listening to what you have to say. Again, I find this to be like kind of fascinating. Every time I debate or have a discussion like this about the topic, I'm just always struck by the fact that you have like, we're halfway around the world. There is a long-standing conflict that's going on between the Israelis and the Palestinians. But yet, when you talk about this again, which, by the way, I'm with you on, I think we should think about, like, what would it be like to live in a state the size of New Jersey where there's school buses being blown up every day? Listen, I live in the state of New Jersey and I have little kids. Like, when you say that, I'm listening and I'm like genuinely trying to put myself in that position. And by the way, I am not saying I'm like a very good person. I think I would go to a pretty bad place pretty quickly if I thought one of my kids were threatened. However, in this conflict, Gaza is a substantially smaller place than Israel and has way more bombings going off, way more innocent people being killed. And so I just always find it interesting that, like, okay, we're going to put ourselves in the Israeli shoes. Like, okay, I'm fine to do that. Let's do that. Could we also attempt to do that to the other side here?
Exactly. So there you have it. I think Dave Smith making an excellent point there at the end. Coleman Hughes is going to, again, try to philosophize and intellectualize his way forward and out of it. Again, when you really understand the true frame of what is happening in this conflict, it becomes absolutely and abundantly clear. There's asymmetrical warfare going on and absolute annihilation of a population perpetuated by radical, theocratic, fascist regime that has radicalized its own population, propped up the terrorists on the other side, and is looking to expand its territory and its territorial influence on the region at the expense of Arabs and preeminently Palestinians in this ethnic cleansing genocidal campaign. That's what it is. And there you have the propaganda arm continuing to do their very, very best. And of course, they are now getting their hands on CBS and TikTok and trying to deepen their control over it. But people understand what's going on. They see what happens. And hopefully the propaganda is not going to get to people's heads. Let me know what you guys think about that in the comments. Happy to hear from you. Like and subscribe. Really would love to get to 10,000 subscribers. So please hit that subscribe button, like the video, and I'll see you guys next time.